two, three. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
This is
the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 14th of October, 2019. In the U.S., in many states in the U.S., I should say, this is Indigenous Day that has replaced the so-called Columbus Day. Columbus, of course, did not discover America. I remember in the 50s when we were in grammar school, they used to tell us that, and we found out right away that he did not. He never, in fact, even made it to what's now the American coastline. So we dismissed Columbus, but in certain areas of the country, it is still celebrated, and it's on the federal level, they still have the day on the 14th of October. This is Boston Red in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth, bringing you up to date on some international news. The Catalan freedom fighters have been in prison. We'll have more on that later here in terms of the sentences that they received there in Catalonia. If you remember, Catalonia had declared their independence, and they were moving right along with independence. But however, the Spanish authorities overthrew them, and the court gave them on Sunday harsh sentences of many 10 or more years. We'll get to the specifics in that particular action here. And two very sad notes out of Fort Worth, Texas. Jefferson was killed in her own house. We'll have to follow that one up. She was sitting in her house with her one of her relatives, and a neighbor had called the police because the door was open, and this police officer came and shot and killed a woman in her own house. She did not have a gun. It was they did have a cam, and they are investigating. Citizens in Fort Worth are outraged. Evidently in that area, 7 or 8 people have been murdered by police in a very short period of time. And we get out of Portland, Oregon, a anti-fascist freedom fighter named Sean D. Keeler, 23 years old, was hit by an SUV, leaving a place called Cedar Riot. They're gathering for anti-fascist, anarchists, and other leftists. We'll have more on him in a minute. And out of Louisiana, they had a primary there. We'll also have that information. As many recall, on Friday Jobber, we had a piece by a graduate of LSU on the Crystal Ball. That's Larry Sabato's shop out of Charlottesville, Virginia. And of course, when we mention them, we always remember Heber Hire, who was killed by fascists in Charlottesville, Virginia. But nonetheless, in Louisiana, they had the so-called open or jungle primary, and the governor there, John Bell Williams, came up short. He did not have 50%. Thus, he will be in a runoff with a millionaire. And that would be an interesting situation. G.J. Trump appeared there in St. Charles, I believe, Louisiana, had a rally there, and people out of rural areas came into the election circumference. Let's go to, let me see, where are we here? I have to look one place at a time here where we are going into. Okay, we'll do the activists first here since it's coming up. This is from the Oregonian in Portland, Oregon. And we have a picture of him up here. And a young man, the activist, died after being hit by an SUV. This is by Emily Goody Kunzer. Anyway. And Sean Cabino. And Jim Ryan. Oh boy. A Portland activist died after being hit by an SUV early Saturday near a northeast Portland cidery and a left-wing hangout, according to multiple people who knew him. He was identified as Sean D. Killeher, 23, of Portland, and as a man who was hit after leaving the cider. Did I call it cider? The cider route, a gathering place for anarchists, anti-fascists, and other leftists. Shots were fired after the car had hit Kelleher and the vehicle crashed into a building. I didn't get that information there. Kelleher, who was identified as an anarchist, was driven to a medical center. Doctors tried to save his life, but according to police, he died of blunt force trauma. Friends brought Kelleher to the hospital, were immediately detained by police, but they were later released from police custody. The Oregonian has learned. The police said no arrests have been made and that the homicide detectives are investigating the case. No details about the circumstances of the crash had been released. The Cedar Riot establishment Kelleher had been leaving is the center of two high-profile legal cases stemming from a May Day brawl between left-wing patrons and members of a right-wing group, who authorities said came to provoke them in a confrontation. A chaotic scene erupted during the May Day brawl with shouting, swearing, brawling, drink throwing, rock throwing, and so forth, and people using pepper spray of it. Mace type this is a Patriot leader, Jody Gibson, and 5 other affiliates were eventually arrested in connection with the brawl. None of the patrons have been arrested or charged in the incident. The Patriot this is that anyway. Patriot anti-fascist crash at the Cedar Route in state regulators crosshair. The owner of the Cedar Riot knowingly allowed his patrons to use illegal weapons during a right-wing agitation during the May Day brawl and refused to remove any unruly customers from his property. Investigation by the Oregon Liquor Board. This is one of the things they put up here. The owner is Goldman Armstrong. Also filed a lawsuit against Gibson and his associates seeking $1 million in damage. And the cidery itself is up for sale. Goldman Armstrong previously told the Oregonian of the crash outside of the Cedar Riot and months of headlines it generated had nothing to do with the decision to sell. Investigators think people have information about the Saturday incident and chain of events preceding it. A memorial has cropped up Saturday in front of the Democratic Party of Oregon's business building, where bloodstains have been seen on the sidewalk. The Democratic Party's building is a 2-minute walk from the Cedar Riot. The organization confirmed on Twitter that the death happened outside its building. We are deeply saddened to learn of the homicide that took place outside of our building. While the location of this is a tragedy, may have been unintentional, we encourage anyone with any information to share it with the appropriate authorities. The crash uprooted a tree that was outside of the outside and scratched the building's outside wall. Friends who set up a GoFund to raise $5,000 for Mr. Kelleher family to pay for funeral expenses since it went live on Sunday. The account has raised $7,000. This is alarming and heartbreaking. Our deepest sympathies to the family and friends of the victim. No doubt about that. The mayor, Ted Wheeler, there tweeted that. The case has set off a stream of wild rumors on social media, none of which have been confirmed. Police ask anyone who has information to contact Scott Burton. He's the detective. That is at 503-823-33774. Again, 503-823-3774. And that is the article. We extend our condolences also to his family. He was not only a anti-fascist fighter, but he taught courses at a African American Empowerment Center on white supremacy, and he will be missed in that community, no doubt about it. Way too young to have been exposed to this type of behavior. Let's go now to the Washington Post. And a number of stories here. We already, well, no, I guess we didn't. The Kurds, the U.S. troops are withdrawing. If you recall, I believe on the week that was, we talked about 40 or 50 U.S. troops were coming out of that area up by the Turkish border, Turkish-Syrian border, there. But now the Defense Secretary was on Face the Nation and said that 8,000 more troops are coming out as quickly as they can get them out of that area. These are U.S. troops. From Northern Syrian administration scrambles to response. And also now units of the Syrian army have moved in to that area, and the Kurds have formed an alliance with them. They struck a deal, according to the Post, to bring in Syrian troops loyal to the Syrian regime of President Assad. So the announcement was made by the Syrian Democratic Forces, further undermine the prospects of any continual U.S. presence. Well, there won't be a U.S. presence now there. And this is a big headline that came out, and many people from both parties have been objected to the move of DJ Trump. And of course, DJ has said that these endless wars was part of his campaign, thus the troops come out. That is one of the problems with this so-called Wilsonian foreign policy that they've been engaged in. The whole Syrian affair is an affair that is exacerbated by the West. And they exacerbated, they supported various sides in the conflict to disrupt the Syrian nation in an internal struggle there. And what basically happened there was, as it went on, more and more people were displaced because of the fighting. And of course the ISIS people were there, the Islamic State came in, and at the same time various other right-wing forces that were actually fighting along with the Islamic State were there. And the whole idea was to overthrow the regime in Damascus of President Assad. It did not work. Various other people came in, including the Russian Federation. They brought in the air support and beat back these ISIS people and then totally destroyed them. Along with Iranian forces there were in there, and those forces together with President Assad's forces beat them back. And so now there's this pocket left in that area. And also they have some camps there where women and children are, and at the same time there are Islamic State fighters that are imprisoned there, and that has to be dealt with. The Kurds are busy there, and we'll see how that moves along from day to day. Gordon Sunderland in a hotel entrepreneur out of Portland, Oregon, is slated to testify on Thursday, I believe. There, and he was the man that provided. Provided text messages. This is from the Post here as we look at it and see exactly where we are. The Nobel Prize for Economics, won by a number of people: Esther Duflo of the MIT, and Michael Kermer, an economist at Harvard, were there, and also one other person there, Banjir Jir, I think that's how you pronounce his name. Anyway, their research credited with breaking down the large questions about poverty into small research questions such as the best innovation for improving child's health and using field experiments to solve them. We'll have more on that on the Numbers Man presentation, which should come out shortly. It's running a little bit late here. So let us move on here with some of the Post articles here, and this is solving the problem of poverty. Three of these people here. Dufour is the second woman to win the prize and youngest person ever to be awarded the prize in economics science, they call it. Talking to the media about an hour after receiving the prize, Dufour, it was incredibly humbling, to tell you the truth. The three of us stand for hundreds of researchers who worked on global poverty. This is the first time the Nobel Committee credited researchers with breaking down large questions about poverty into small research questions, such as the best interventions for improving child health and using field experience. Solomon Kramer launched a number of field experience in the 90s in Western Kenya to improve education results. Banerjee and Dufour later performed similar studies, building research methods now entirely dominant in developing countries, according to the Nobel Committee. The efforts help inspire school tutoring programs that benefited more than 500 Indian children, for instance, as well as preventative health care subsidized in a number of countries. It's just 2 decades, and their new experiment-based approach transformed development economics, which is now a flourishing field of research. That's the Nobel Committee said on Twitter, naturally. Everyone is on Twitter these days. Asked by a reporter what she'd do with the winnings, Dufour said she, as a child, read about the first female to win the prize. That was Curie. Marie Curie used her money to buy a grain of the element radium. I guess we'll talk between the three of us and figure out what is our grain of radium. Okay. Anyway, that is that article there. Let's go to Gordon Suntram, I believe, here, and is about to blow a hole in the defense, according to the Post here, of DJ Trump's Ukrainian defense. We'll get it right in a minute. This is by Aaron Buick. Ever since two former special envoys to Ukraine, as Kurt Volker, handed over those texts, Trump's defenders pointed to one of them as supposedly exonerating Trump. Bill, I believe you are incorrect about Trump's intentions, as Gordon Suntram said, and the ambassador to the EU told another diplomat the president has been crystal clear. No quid pro quo of any kind. The texts have been a linchpin of the Ukrainian defense, but on Sunday night the linchpin broke. According to the Post here, that a person close to Sundstrom said that the ambassador will tell Congress in a deposition this week there was some kind of quid pro quo, but not a corrupt one. Sumlin will indicate that he was merely relaying Trump's defense, which he had discussed with the president on the phone call before the text. Sondland plans to tell lawmakers he had no knowledge of whether the president was telling him the truth at the moment. It's only true that the president said it, not that it was true. The president familiar with the testimony of Sondland would say. Person familiar with Sondland's testimony said the ambassador believes Trump at the time, and on the basis of passed along as assurances that Trump was not withholding military aid for political purposes. Sondland's testimony will raise the possibility that Trump wasn't truthful in his denial of quid pro quo, as well as an alternative scenario in which the president interest in the scheme sound at the time when the administration faced mounting scrutiny over why it was withholding the $400 million that was in assistance to the Ukraine. Where he is deciding it gets too hot to handle, and he backed off whatever his position really was a month earlier. I don't know. Sondland is expected to say that for months before September's 9th message, he worked at the direction of Rudy Giuliani, that's his personal attorney there, who himself is now being looked at. In another text, the deliverable sought by Trump, a public statement from Ukraine that it would investigate corruption, including the mentioning of Baraja as a Ukrainian energy company that has come up in it. He said that only the three hadn't suggested he also said the only one of the three hadn't suggested a quid pro quo. Volker suggested it involving in a meeting with Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. And the charge d'affaires, as somebody named Bill Taylor, suggested it involved millions of dollars in military aid that was being withheld. Trump and his defenders have hailed Sondland's text as being positive, and the Wall Street Journal's columnist Kimberly Strassel, in a column promoted by Trump on Friday, accused the mainstream media of ignoring the important text, saying that Sondland had shut down the claim of a quid pro quo. And of course, the idea that Trump's defense would even rest on that quote was a folly from the beginning. As soon as the texts were released, pretty much everyone who understood how these things work viewed Sondland's text as a very lurid-like expression of the party line. It seemed to be exactly the same thing intended for public consumption if these texts ever became part of an investigation. And his suggestion that it would take the conversation off of text and perhaps a medium with no paper trail also indicated he knew something problematic was taking place. This is Sondland. The implosion of this particular defense, of Trump defense, epitomizes the broad problem his supporters have here. The vast majority of Republicans have been unwilling to go to bat for Trump, avoiding questions or deflecting them or talking about something else. That appears to have become because they have little faith that something more incriminating won't eventually come out, making their defense look silly, and as this one has now. Trump and Giuliani, the president's personal lawyer, simply don't appear to have taken much care to avoid at least the appearance of soliciting foreign influence. The other quote that Trump and his defenders often point to is from Zelensky, who said he didn't feel pressured like Sondland, though Zelensky had an interest in playing down anything corrupt because Ukraine relies on the U.S. The fact that these statements are at the core of Trump's defense shows how little they are working at this point. Now, understand, this is editorializing here. We don't know at this point until the actual statements and Sondland, the ambassador Sondland, actually testifies and tweet. Trump indicated that he'd love to send Ambassador Sondland, a real good man and great American, to testify. It sounds as if it may have not been the case anymore. Sondland's impeding testimony sounds like a man covering his own backside and knowing that his apparent defense of Trump could quickly fall apart upon further examination. Well, the problem with this whole scenario here is that Sondland himself, being now, he's the ambassador to the EU. What is he dealing with Ukraine in the first place? Because Ukraine is not a member of the EU. But there's always a case, a problem with this type of testimony, especially when you involve many people from intelligence agencies, outlets, etc. That someone has a more complete copy, or even to a more worse scenario of an audio of the conversation, or conversations not only of DJ Trump, but of various other principals in this particular setup. Or they may be people involved we don't know about. It coming out sort of like the White House taping system under Tricky Dick Nixon. So those are some things that stand out here. But what the administration has been able to do is ride a wave of confusion. And we'll connect that up also with the events that happened in Louisiana this weekend. And happened down there with John Bell Edwards. So all these things are related. And when you have this type of event, it's not like a burglary of a psychologist's office or something of that nature. It's difficult for people to get their heads around because many people do not understand what is going on. Now, this is another one here. Basically, is the Trump a combination of all that has gone wrong in our... Trump is the combination. This is by E.J. Dion. There's understanding delight over the name of a company run by one of Giuliani's Ukrainian connected buddies, arrested last week for allegedly laundering money into the Trump political effort. It is called Fraud Guarantee. This will provide an excellent title for a book on the Trump era, deceitfulness being one of Trump's traits we can rely upon. And if there's one thing guaranteed in our election campaigns now, it's a danger that we'll be influenced by foreign donors. In 2010, Citizens United decision overruling the Supreme Court, conservative poo-pooed the dangers of corruption and created many new openings through which dark money, including cash in Ukraine, Russia, and anywhere else in the world, can infect our politics. Rebuilding protections against the now virtual unlimited opportunities for influence buying must be a priority once Trump is out of power. The indictment of Giuliani's associates is well worth reading as a roadmap to how the system can be gamed. It illustrates, it said a veteran campaign reformer, that's Fred Weissmeyer, of how Citizens United created a clear path for unlimited amounts of foreign money to enter our political system. He's been around, Fred Weissmeyer has been around a very long time. Now he's has a new group out there. The arrest also made clear that Trump's July 25th call seeking help from Ukrainian President to smear Joe Biden was part of a larger structure of corruption that is a hallmark of the Trump presidency. Like many demagogues, Trump demoralizes minorities, his political enemies, to hide his devotion to the art of the shady deal. We might never know about the shenanigans of Levick, Parmas, and Igor Thurman, U.S. citizens born respectively in Ukraine and Belarus, absent a complaint to the Federal Election Commission. Trevor Potter, the Senate's president, said in the interview that this group noticed in 2018 on the 17th of May, contribution of $325,000 from a limited liability corporation, Global Energy Products, to America First, a pro-Trump super PAC. seemed to have no real business purpose. Potter and his associate colleagues suspected that it was a shell company, which it turned out to be. The indictment charges that Parnas and Furman and two of the defendants used it to make political donations, funded by an unidentified Russian businessman. It's a fake, and they were caught. That's what Potter, a Republican former chairman of the FEC, said. The dark money system makes it almost impossible to find this stuff. Potter argues that Citizens United and related ruling the Supreme Court made a terrible mistake in minimizing the definition of corruption. The court fundamentally misunderstood how politics works and the dangers of corruption for unlimited and secret campaign spending. The chickens are coming home to roost in this indictment. By bringing roasting chickens to public attention, big scandals put bill pressure for reform. One important effect of Watergate was the passage of campaign finance laws that worked well for a generation. No doubt about these laws need update even before the Supreme Court gutted protections against influence buying. The Trump Bazaar, populated by a variety of seedy characters, brings home the urgency for making this task. The indictment said Representative John Sarbanes, the leading sponsor of H.R. 1, the comprehensive reform bill approved this year by the House. It's a glimpse into the broad culture of corruption, ethical blindness that has infected our politics, particularly the area of campaign finance. He used the word culture is important. Legal limits on unsavory presses outlaw social destructive actions, but also signal what kind of public behavior are morally acceptable. Bad laws encourage bad habits. People cross these lines with impunity, Sarbanes said. And told me, and if you can't see the lines, they are starting to think that they can get away with anything. Which it brings it back to a man whose words and actions suggest he does believe that he can get away with anything. It is a supreme irony that Trump triumphed by exploiting a public disaffection with a political system so many Americans see as infested with sleaze and controlled by forces operating entirely for their own benefit, rather than being the cure for such a malaise. He is their apostate thesis. The accumulation of all this has gone wrong in our politics. The task of the impeachment inquiry is to use the Ukrainian misadventure to bring home the breadth of the president's vanity and self-dealing. The goal should not be to rid the country of a dangerous leader only, but also to show how desperate our system needs repair. E.J. Dion Jr. Now let me get to Catalonia. It seemed from a number of the Spanish Supreme Court sentenced Catalan leaders to prison, sparking protests, of course, in Catalan. Sentenced 9 Catalan leaders Monday to prison terms of 9 to 13 years that ruling that triggered immediate protests and police response. A 2017 referendum on Catalan independence, which Madrid deemed illegal, and subsequent trial of those behind it split Spanish society like no other event since the country's democratic transformation in the mid-70s after the death of the fascist Francisco Franco, who they finally moved his body. Anyway, in response to the ruling, separatist sympathizers in Catalonia vowed a massive civil disobedience. We'll have a special program, incidentally, on WBRN Radio and the Boston Red Network. It is a rejection of a process they deemed overly harsh. National police forces descend on Barcelona that is the Catalan capital, as demonstrators began in haste. There's been political proceedings putting people on trial solely exclusively for their political ideas. That's from Alfred Bosch, the Catalan Minister of Foreign Action Institutions and Transparency. The prison terms imposed upon the 9 Catalan leaders represent a historical error that, far from solving the problem, merely worsens it, he said. Still, at least one Catalan civic group said it would respect the ruling and the statement of Catalan civil society. I don't know who they are anyway, let's forget about them. The Spanish prosecutors initially sought prison terms of 25 years. For some of them, the former Vice President Jaquinas and the highest-ranking Catalan official on trial, Jaquinas was ultimately sentenced to 13 years, a total of 100 years in prison. And how humble, and now more than ever we'll be with you and your families. That was a comment there that the Catalan independence was closer than ever. His comments are related by his Republican left party. And for Catalan, Charles Puigdemont, he's the former regional president there. In a statement on Twitter, of course, he'd fled to Belgium after the referendum. A total of 100 years imprisonment. How terrible. Now more than ever, we will be with you and with your families, and for the future of our sons and daughters. The ruling looks set to play a role in the Spanish elections in early November. The fourth vote the country has held. The Socialist Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, a socialist, have failed to form a government after winning a general election in April, largely because of standout with small parties on the left and the political center. Political analysts say the vote, in the context of Spain's mounting political fragmentation, there are 2 political parties in the parliament that support Catalan independence, and it would be unclear how the verdict in the Catalan trial would affect the upcoming election. It's either going to get the pro-independent parties more votes, so the people will come to the conclusion that we have been through this one, and we have a sentence, and we won't get votes. That's from some analysts in the Ireno Royal Institute in Madrid. Anyway, that is that particular issue there. Let's move on here and see if we have an article here for the BBC. I think what will happen is we will save the BBC's article to our more complete coverage, which you will hear on BR on the World. Basically, they said Catalonian leaders jailed for sedition by a Spanish court. That is the headline in the BBC. Here in the Catalan flag, that they were sentenced 9 to 13 years. 3 of the defendants were found guilty of disobedience and fined, but will not serve prison sentences. The 12 politician activists have all denied the charges. So the mass demonstrations come, and the BBC in 300 words, and we've already talked about this. We'll get back to this one later. Let's now go to New Orleans, Louisiana. And the election in New Orleans. The winner on the Republican side here, this is the applicant in New Orleans, Rapini, I suppose, won a spot in the runoff against John Bell Edwards. Trump may be the reason why, is this what they have said here. Trump looms large in the, let me see who this is. This is by Tyler Briggs and William Santel, the staff, on the 13th of October. DJ Trump looms large over the Louisiana governor's race. a day after John Bell Edwards fell short. It was on the Saturday primary. Bell and many of his and many of his biggest supporters thought he would win re-election Saturday night by at least taking 50%. Now, Edwards, the only Democratic governor in the Deep South, was held to 46.6, while Rapini won a spot with 27.4. U.S. Representative Ralph Abraham finished third with 23.6. Out of money, he promptly endorsed Rapini, a fellow Republican there. And now this is Miles Coleman. He was the graduate that wrote an article on the Crystal Ball, who is an associate editor of the Crystal Ball, a nationally respected political newsletter. And we usually have it on Friday. Jobber and website at the University of Virginia. They've rated the race a toss-up. We'll have more about that later. A political analyst on Sunday said Trump's late entrance into the race spelled a difference. More than 200,000 more people voted in the primary compared to 2015's runoff that Edwards won, an increase of about 17%. That is according to an analysis by Jim Kitchens, who was a governor's poster 4 years ago and was an independent consultant for this campaign. Indicated that most of the 200 were rural European voters who voted for either Rapini or Abraham. That's the Trump effect. It accomplished the task. It created a runoff, Kitchen said, who is based in Florida. On Sunday, Rapini said he received a congratulatory tweet from DJ Trump. The media is not talking about the big Republican victory last night in Louisiana, where a sitting Democratic governor was forced into a runoff by not getting 50%. Big upset now. Eddie Rapini, who will be a great governor, will win. Now, John Covelu, I suppose is how he pronounces that name, Independent Post in Baton Rouge, said he thought the recent push for Trump's impeachment, this is where this comes in here, by Democrats in Washington hurt Edwards, even though the governor distanced himself from the effort. Trump won the state by 20% in 2016 and remains popular amongst conservative Louisiana voters. Republicans hold seats, hold all the seat elected statewide except the governor. Majorities in both chambers of the state legislature, even with every seat in the, along with every seat in the congressional delegation, with the exception of one specifically drawn for people of color. Trump punctuated this role by rallying Republican voters in Lake Charles on Friday night with a 90-minute show that repeatedly brought the crowd to its feet 4 days after his son rallied in Lafayette. Edwards had counted on collecting at least 33% of the European vote, they say white, we say European, to win the primary. An election eve survey by veteran pollster. This is Vernie Kennedy for a group of business types that showed the governor winning as much as 42% of the European vote. He was way off. But Edwards won only 31% of the European vote on Friday. That's the estimate here. We'll have to go back here. Greg Regmer, a respected New Orleans-based pollster, that's Rigamer, on Thursday night had Edwards winning just under 50% overall. The atmosphere were not there for the first primary victory. They deluded themselves into thinking that is Covian. Maybe it's Covian. Said of the Edwards campaign, the Florida-based Kennedy was chastised on Sunday after predicting that Edwards would win the primary by 55% of the vote, a forecast that boasted many of the governor's top supporters on Saturday. Since 1991, Kennedy has polled every Louisiana governor's race for a group of businessmen that include John Georges, the owner of the Advocate, and Times-Picayune. I've never been more than 2%, Kennedy said. Either the African-American vote was way low or Trump made a real difference. Cavalian's analysis of the results indicate that Trump played an oversized role. He estimated that this is Cavalian estimated that the African vote accounted for 26.5% of the overall ballots cast, which was 5/10 below what Kennedy had forecast. Cavalian also estimated that African people gave 95% of their vote to Edwards, which was 1% more than Kennedy had forecast. 91%, excuse me. Saturday night's results mean that Rapini and Abraham combined for 51% of the vote. Now, this is a bit tricky here. Anytime you combine the two other candidates together and say, okay, this will be 51% of the vote, or this will be 49% of the vote, or whatever, it can be very, very tricky. It could, in other words, the Republicans could come up with 51% of the vote, or they could come up with less, or many times more. Just to remember that one. Patrick's Livewire Landry, a Republican minor candidate, brought the Republican vote overall to 52%. So the race began with Edwards needing 3.5% more to win the runoff, with Rapini needing only to secure all the Republican votes. Landry, a building engineer at a downtown, New Orleans hotel, and part-time artist. In other words, he's the janitor. Referring to the governor, Landry said, "I'm happy to know he's going to be fired next month." Okay. Gary Landrew, who was at a 0.775% of the vote as an independent, had little to say about Edwards. On Sunday, accusing the governor of trying to evict Landrew from a marina and shipyard he owns in New Orleans. I'm not sure about all this. Oscar Omar Danzler, a Democrat who won 0.8%, declined to express his preference. Even before the votes were counted, Robert H. Hogan, the chairman of LSU's political department, said Rapin rise from a political novelist to a Trump apostate showed he had hit a nerve with GOP voters, even as he refused to spell out his plans. Rags to riches types, big house mentality, Jerry Pippin used to call it. Voters responded favorably to bumper stickers, platitudes about bureaucrats and big government. He wrote, "If you have money to buy enough political ads that repeat such a message, it's possible to get the voters to act on those predispositions." Rapin also showed no qualms in attacking Abraham, a three-term congressman, as a career politician who voted 300 times with Nancy Pelosi. Rapin's attacks prompted a howl of protest from conservative political leaders, including talk show host Moon Giffon and Hayride, a political organ there. Native campaign works, especially when it's directed at a sitting congressman, Hogan said. This suggests that voters harbor a deep well of anti-establishment sentiment that Rapin effectively leveraged. On Sunday, both remaining candidates met privately with key advisors in Baton Rouge to plot strategies to raise money. Rapin's advantage: he spent $11 million of his own money in the primary, so he virtually has unlimited funds to spend. Rapin gained one addition to his campaign on Saturday night. He will now have state police protection Okay, so they're getting ready for the big one. Now, we have here, and we'll stay with them, this is a JMC Enterprises here out of Louisiana polling company. We've looked at their polls before, and they are members of the American Association of Political Consultants, belong to that. Anyway, that's one of the things here, and we don't have the official release up here. We'll have to get it. I'll see if we can get it up here and give you a little bit of what it is, or what they had to say at JMC. Their poll was a fairly accurate poll here. Anyway, a good night for statewide Republicans. Now the primary is over. JMC has summarized the thoughts about the primary election results at both the state and legislative. Not only was Governor Edwards forced into a runoff that many pundits thought wasn't going to happen, but even with an incumbent Democrat who played down his Democratic Party affiliation while publicly noting that 9 times he visited the Trump White House, voters by a 52 to 47 margin chose a Republican candidate. This includes a 52 48 edge in Governor Edwards' home parish of Triangulula Parish? I'm not sure. In other statewide races, the Republican performance was between 60% in the treasurer's race, 68% in the lieutenant governor's race. And let me just go down here a minute. This is neck-breaking. This is probably the only place you're going to find this. Similar red flags for legislative Republicans. Successes did not stop at the state level, with a substantial number of open seats in both chambers. Due to term limits, Republicans picked up 3 House seats and 2 Senate seats. 4 of those 5 seats were based in ancestrally Democratic rural parishes of Allen, Avonville, and Evangeline. And these parishes have never before given Republican legislative candidates serious consideration. Furthermore, Republicans are likely in runoffs to pick up a state House seat in St. Mary's Parish, which, while also taking serious shots at an unseated independent representing Felicia Canis, who was elected in a special election. Likely legislative membership will be 27 Republicans and 12 Democrats in the Senate, and 69 and 34 with 2 independents in the House. You can see where that is going. High turnout. Now, this is an interesting situation here, more so than anything else. In the 2015 primary, 1.14 million, 39% turned out to vote. Last night, the turnout increased to 45%, a total of 1.34 million. And that is the difference there. While 25% of early voting was African American, JMC estimates that due to 35% election day turnout in European parishes and 28% election day turnout in African American parishes, and 27% of last night's electorate was African American. In other words, an estimate total electorate was 26.5 African American, which is on the low side of Louisiana in terms of the Democratic base. You need over 30%. So that is one of the problems right there. And to finish this up, early voting. In October 2015, 235,000 early votes. Best early votes was 21% of the total vote for this primary in 2019, a near record. Now, this is one of the things here: 386,000 voted early, and gave the total turnout. It looks like 28% of the voters' vote was cast early. Now, that more early voters there. The early vote favored Edwards, 45 to 27% over Abrams and Rappion. 26% supported Rapini, I suppose, with 2% favored another candidate, while the Democrats only saw incremental gains from Election Day vote, 47% for Edwards, 28% for Rapini, and 22% for Abraham, 3% for other candidates. More JMC estimates that Governor Edwards received 91% of the African American vote and 31% of the European vote, respectively, except that the African American turnout overall wasn't very strong. Now, that is the story there, so we wrap that up very, very quickly. And let me just look at that. We're going to have to wrap it up here. Nonetheless, this is the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 14th of October, 2019. Boston Red from the Jerry Pippin Memorial broadcast booth here, and this will do it for us. We don't really have to get the real clear politics one out here now, I don't think, because we'll get that on the next broadcast here. We had some polling, I think it was a CBS poll, was it? I believe it was a CBS poll somewhere here. And for some reason we can't find it. Yeah. Well, let's check here. Maybe it's... Nah. Anyway, nonetheless, we'll have to get that on a later broadcast of where we stood. And we'll see you the next broadcast. Incidentally, Numbers Man is coming up here. We have finished the broadcast. We just haven't recorded as of yet. Nonetheless, have a good week or day.